There's never going to be a real definitive greatest albums list.
Ooh.
Oh, you think you can?
I think there can be. Ooh, this one is going to be hot. Welcome to Get to the Hook. We are going to get to the hook. I am your host, Charles Latibeaudiere.
And I am your host, Eric Colley.
So this week is really, I feel like this is what podcasts were invented for.
Argue?
Yes, to argue, to have spirited debate about lists. And honestly, I think that these magazines and publications and outlets and streaming services, they make these lists just to keep podcasts in business. Because let's be honest, a lot of those streaming things, they're also in the podcast business. So,
of course, especially Apple.
Right, especially Apple, which came out with their list of the top 100 albums of all time. Wow. Well, there's no way you can do that list without people being pissed off.
Of course. Right? And that's why, honestly, I kind of like these lists because it just gives you debate and something to argue about. Because, no, it's also subjective. There's never going to be a real definitive greatest albums list. It's too hard to...
Ooh.
Oh, you think you can?
I think there can be. For 100, you should have, I would say, there should be a solid 60 to 70 albums that nobody would argue should be in the top 100.
Sure.
There are 60 to 70 albums that I don't think should be in their top 100 at all. I'm not even talking about the order of it. They can get the order.
Well,
I get
the
that.
order at a point. How do you pick this
part,
album's better than that album?
Yes.
They're just great albums.
The order part, you can be very subjective, but just get them all in the box. Just put 100 in the box, and then everybody can go in and sort them out however they want. But I don't even understand how they got some of these in the box. But look, we'll start with the top 10. I think the top 10 really showed what this list was about.
It's a very, it's much more modern top 10 than these lists usually have.
Right. 3
of their top 10 albums are from the 2010s. And not even just, I mean,
they're
go. All 3 good albums.
Yes.
For sure. But it's hard to even really judge how great an album is within a few years. Like, you need a little bit of space to say, is this a classic?
Right. Well, obviously, the people that Apple lined up to do this survey and to do this list are skewing younger than most of these lists usually do. Like, to hell with, like, Rolling Stone, they basically said, you guys are dust.
Right.
You're all turning into dust, so we don't want to hear about your list anymore.
I do find this list interesting because it's very Gen Z and younger millennial skewing. Because like when Rolling Stone and all these older publications do these kind of lists, it skews very old white guy boomer rock.
Yes.
It's always the Beatles and the Stones and Bob Dylan and of course those are all great things and most of those artists are on this list, but lower.
But lower and in much less frequency if they're lucky enough to have even made the list.
Yeah. There are 21 hip-hop albums on this list.
Yeah, a lot of
which is more than any other genre.
Can't say that it is not an inclusive list as far as just different ethnicities and races. Like, this is not, it's not a Rolling Stone old white guys list.
Right.
And I guess that should be, it should be applauded. My biggest issue with the list in general is what you said, that the reason that lists usually have older art acts, older albums, because you need some time to judge how great something is. And 2010 seems like, I don't know, maybe a little too soon, but...
To put in the top 10, should we start from 10?
Yes, let's start with 10.
Casey Kasem style?
Let's do...
All right, coming in at number 10. The smaller the numbers, the bigger the hits. Number 10, and it's a great album, Beyonce's Lemonade.
Yes.
From 2016.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Which is, I believe that is the most recent album in the top 10.
See, as soon as I saw that as the top 10, as number 10, I was like, okay, I know where this is. I know where this is going. And in that sense, I was actually happy with some of the other selections because I didn't think they were going to be there.
I thought it'd be much more modern even than it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was, I think, one album from the 60s in the top 10, one from the 70s, two from the 80s, two from the 90s, only one from the 2000s, and then 3 from the 2010s. Number 9, it's from the 90s. It's an obvious one. Nirvana, Nevermind.
Got no issue with that.
Usually ranks a little bit higher with like old white rock critics, but still, it's on the top 10.
And it was in the top 10.
But it is also the only like 90s of like that alternative and grunge era. It's the only one of those kind of albums to make the top 100 at all. No Pearl Jam 10, no Smashing Pumpkins, Siamese Dream, no Soundgarden, none of that.
There's a reason for, and there's something else that happened with the '90s here, but we'll get to that. Let's continue through the.
Number 8, the one album from the 2000s, Amy Winehouse, Back to Black.
I got no issue with that.
No, great album.
I might have put it top 20, but okay.
Yeah, there's a couple, like, spoiler, Fleetwood Mac's Rumors was number 11. I would put Rumors above probably any of these other albums so far. Number 7, I've seen people who are younger hip-hop fans have issue with this. Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City. And the problem they have, not that it's there because Kendrick's a great artist.
It's the wrong Kendrick album.
It should be To Pimp a Butterfly.
Right. And I've seen some critics talking about it who feel like To Pimp a Butterfly wasn't as accessible an album.
Right.
Like the music, the tracks on it weren't as accessible as this one, and
It's
maybe
a bit
that's
more abrasive and experimental. And
right.
There's a lot of times, though, we'll probably dig into this more later, but where I think they had the right artist and a good album, but maybe not the album. Like Janet Jackson's Control made the top 100.
Yeah.
I would think Rhythm Nation is the more obvious.
Control was at 42.
Right.
But yes, no Rhythm Nation, and honestly, I would argue no Janet.
Yeah, Janet's great. Even Velvet Rope, maybe not top 100,
and again,
but
talking about, and I guess this is, some people have had issues with the artists themselves. I think the artists that they've had on here are largely okay.
There are a few notable omissions.
Some that were omitted, we're going to get to that. But you got to remember that you're thinking about an album. So it's not just the artist. And like, for instance, one of the omissions that a lot of people, two of them that they pointed out, there's no Whitney Houston, there's no Mariah Carey. Okay, well, to me, that just means that they didn't think that there was a full album that was worthy of, and you probably could find out with Mariah. Actually, you could find
Mariah,
with
I would
Whitney
say
too.
Mariah, you could do either Emancipation of Mimi, one of the biggest comeback albums of all time, a very respected album. Butterfly, her 97 album, where she kind of married hip-hop more to her music. Daydream, that had Fantasy and One Sweet Day.
Yeah,
And
there were
Baby.
albums
You
probably
could.
with Mariah, but
Whitney, I also noticed, other than one of the top 5, which doesn't really count because it's a single artist, but no soundtracks. So The Bodyguard got eliminated.
Right.
And Saturday Night Fever, which, that's a great album.
That's a mistake.
That's a mistake to me.
But
Yeah, so Kendrick was, 7. Number 6, I think we'll agree on this, Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life. Absolutely one of the great albums of all time.
Yep, absolutely deserves.
And
Should have been in the top 5, but okay.
Also, Stevie is one of only 5 artists. I want to see if you know this. Only 5 artists had 2 albums in this top 100. You know the other 4.
The Beatles.
The Beatles.
Beyonce.
Yep. And Stevie. So 2 others.
2 others. I don't know the other 2.
Radiohead had 2, although none of them made the top 10. They had Kid A and OK Computer.
Yeah.
And then somebody else we're going to get to in the top 5 had 2 albums. But at number 5.
Oh, yes. And I know the other one. Yeah.
Number 5, this one shocked a lot of people. And I think this has been a lot of the discussion around this list, because especially older people were like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Blonde by Frank Ocean. Even if you don't know any Frank Ocean, here's a little bit of his song, Pink and White.
That's the way every day goes. Every time we've no control. If the sky is pink and white, if the ground is black and yellow, it's the same way you show.
Beautiful song. I love that song. It has 1.2 billion streams on Spotify. So not a hit in the traditional sense, but that song resonates. The album does.
Yeah, I don't know a lot of Frank Ocean. I have heard that song before. And so I can't really judge whether or not it just stood out, though, as like
the one that most people
Frank
probably
Ocean?
are not as, because it didn't produce a lot of hits or anything. But I want to pull another sample of a song from an artist who's not on this list. It's a singer named Jake, spelled Jvke, because it's the 2020s.
Because why not?
So this was a big hit last year. His song Golden Hour, where he's in his 20s and he's being nostalgic about his teen years, and he references being in the car listening to Blonde. Here's a little bit of Golden Hour.
It was just 2 lovers sitting in the car, listening to Blonde, falling for each other. Pink and orange skies, feeling
so, teen young lovers in the back of a
was-
car. Yeah, it's a cultural touchstone for people of a certain age. And I think if you're over a certain age, you're like, I don't get this at all.
Right.
But I think if you're younger, you get Frank Ocean is seen as this visionary R&B artist. And he's kind of reclusive. He's only done a couple albums. He did his Coachella set last year that kind of bombed, and he seemed not ready for, but people just rallied to his side and supported him. So I think that album has an appeal to people, younger people, that older people just don't get. And that's okay.
Agreed.
Not everything is for
Agreed.
everybody.
Yep, that's true.
Number 4,
Prince.
and The Revolution, Purple Rain.
Mhm.
Prince is the 5th artist that had 2 albums.
Right.
His Sign of the Times
Sign of
album.
the Times.
Number 51.
When I saw the list, the first thing I did was search. If Sign of the Times is not on this album, I'm not looking at the rest of it. But Sign of the Times is on the list, so all right.
I was very happy to see that. I was afraid Purple Rain would be like number 51.
Oh, and I could see that. That's
see that.
That's the thing about this list is that, yes, it's at 4, and that's great. And I think that's more an acknowledgement that those songs have more legs with the younger generation. Like
Right.
they've heard them, they get it.
Well, I think
So-
that's the thing to the old 60s rock stuff. I think to younger listeners, those songs kind of sound dated and sludgy now. But Purple Rain, it is a rock album, but it's also an R&B album. It's a
Yep.
funk album. It's got all this like electronic sound to it. It's still, it's very 80s and yet also very modern at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it has that appeal. One 60s album that did appeal to everybody, The Beatles, Abbey Road, number 3 on this
Okay.
list. And that's my personal favorite Beatles record. Sgt. Pepper did not make the list at all, which shocked a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost like they decided, look, we're only going to do either Sgt. Pepper's or
Abbey Road.
or
Or
Pet Sounds.
oh yeah, Pet Sounds was number
And Pet
20.
Sounds
Beach
was
Boys.
20. They're like,
Yeah.
well, we're not going to do both of them.
Right.
We'll give them one. We'll give those old guys one.
Can't give the Beatles 3.
Right.
But they were number 3 on this list. Number 2, Michael Jackson, Thriller.
Yep. No
Classic.
one's going to, some people might say, oh, well, you should have been number 1, but at least it's at 2, so that makes it debatable.
And I think even if it was going to be number 1, they probably wouldn't have wanted that because it would have seemed too obvious.
It would have seemed
If
like
you're not
one of
gonna
those
go
old guy
for,
lists.
yeah, if you're not going to go for like a Sgt. Pepper kind of obvious thing, okay, Thriller is the slightly younger obvious thing. They went for something that their number 1, it's not obvious, but it kind of makes sense. I don't take issue with it.
Mhm.
Lauryn Hill's The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. And I think partly that album has resonated with younger listeners because it's been sampled a lot in recent years.
Sampled so much.
The
and
song-
they've probably gone and they've discovered it and been like, hey, you know what? This album was
Yeah.
pretty dope.
Her song X Factor, which was not even the biggest hit off that record, and I think it's one of the best R&B songs of the 90s easily. It was sampled for Cardi B's Be Careful. It was sampled for Drake's Nice for What, which was a big number 1 hit. This is a little bit of X Factor.
Care for me, care for me. I know you care for me, there for me, there for me. You said you'd be there for me, cry for me, cry for me. You said you'd die for me, give to me, give to me. Why won't you live?
I love
By the way,
that song.
that is my favorite song on the album.
It's a perfect song.
It is a perfect song. It is a beautiful song. I'm trying to remember. Did Santana play the solo at the end of it? I don't think it was.
I don't
but
think
it
on that
sounded
song.
like
He
it
played
was.
on a different song.
There was a different song he
Yeah.
played on.
Also, the song Everything is Everything on that album. Do you know who played piano on
he
that?
played on Zion was the song
Yes,
he played
yeah.
on. Right.
Everything is Everything. The piano player was a teenager named John Legend.
Really?
It was one of the first things he ever did.
Wow.
He
So
wasn't
John
even
Legend,
famous at all yet.
who by the way is not on the list at
Not
all.
on the list.
Didn't get in the top 100, but he did play piano
He did.
on a song on the number 1 album.
So,
yeah,
like I said, you're splitting hairs at that point. Obviously, if I'm doing my personal pick, Purple Rain's number 1, but Miseducation is a great album.
yes.
Thriller's a great album. Abbey Road's a great album. Any of those.
If you want to make a provocative choice, that is a really good provocative choice that people will talk about. They'll debate it, but no one's going to say it's trash and your list is trash.
Yeah, it's not like, well, that's a stupid decision. Like I
Right.
said, the most head scratching for a lot of people is probably Frank Ocean, and that's also a great album. It's more recent,
Right.
but
I realized something about this list. This is probably how, and I can't remember the first time I saw one of. It used to be it was really only Rolling Stone that made these sorts of lists, right? This is probably how I felt the first time they did one in, like, say, the late 90s.
Mhm.
Or maybe even early 2000s.
because early 2000s when the first one came out.
Because I would have said, and I do remember saying, where's all the music I grew up on?
Right.
What is this old stuff? Yeah, I like some of that old stuff, but where are the 80s hits that I grew
Yeah.
up on? Where are the incredible albums?
Yeah,
of the
cool
80s?
Velvet Underground. Where's Duran Duran?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's probably exactly what
Also,
I said.
this list, Velvet Underground's on it. Again, where's Duran Duran?
There is no Duran Duran.
There's
That's
no,
right.
I get that. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah.
Actually, I was thinking though of like because they have a couple of big pop records on this list. A couple that I think would have made sense if you're going for the '80s. Cyndi Lauper's "She's So Unusual" could arguably
Yep.
be one of the top 100. Katy Perry's "Teenage Dream." I mean, it's fluff, but it's really good fluff.
Yeah,
And it
but
was
they did Madonna's on there, right?
Madonna's Like a Prayer was
Like a
number
Prayer is-
77. And that's the one I would pick if I was
Yeah.
going to pick a Madonna record. Yeah, some of the other ones, I think it's interesting the choices they made. Bruce Springsteen has an album. It's Born to Run. That
Run.
makes sense. It's just interesting to see that Born in the
Born in
USA.
the USA not on it. Again, I think they discounted a lot of the music I grew up on, that you
Right,
grew up on.
right.
And I think that's just a function of when they were in there, most of the younger people, the Gen X people who are on Gen Z people who helped make this list, the 80s hadn't come back around as like a thing yet
Right.
for them when they were growing up. So it doesn't mean anything to them.
But now it is. They're discovering
Now
it
it is.
through
They're starting
The
to-
Weeknd has brought it the 80s back. Was the Weeknd on the
Yeah.
list?
No, he's not.
I don't think he had any
The
albums.
Weekend not.
He's
on
probably
the
going to
list at all.
boycott them now.
Yeah.
Like the Grammys.
I mean, Drake's only on it once, which
Yeah.
some people could debate, but there's no way Apple's doing a top 100 and not putting Drake in
Right.
there somewhere
Because a lot of this, they want you to listen to these albums.
Exactly.
I think Metallica's Master of Puppets over their Black Album, the one with Enter Sandman, Kate Bush's Hounds of Love. I think both of those maybe got a bump because of Stranger Things, because now younger kids, those
Discovered, yeah.
they both those albums both went viral 2 years ago because of that show, and they're like, wow, this stuff is great.
Yeah, okay, man, this is great music. They just need something to help them discover it.
Right. Well, that's what I find interesting is this as Gen X, is seeing which of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s albums resonate at all with younger listeners. I mean, I'm very happy to see they still have some reverence for Purple Rain.
Although we should say, there are, I'm sure, some people who participated in this who were older.
Of course.
And maybe they just put their foot down and like, no, y'all not going to put Purple Rain at 92. We're not doing
Yeah,
that.
it is not going to be behind Bad Bunny's Un Verano Sin Ti. Another one, a big 80s guy, and I was happy to see on this list, but I'm surprised by the choice, George Michael. I would think Faith is a no-brainer to put on there. It was critically loved. It was commercially huge. It checks all the boxes for this kind of list. And they went with his 1990 album, Listen Without Prejudice, Volume 1.
I get it.
It does have some,
It's
Freedom 90, this song is such
it's
a
a
banger.
more serious, almost brooding sort of album as as an album collection. More serious. It
Right.
feels a little more weighty, and maybe that's why they went with
Yeah.
it. But you're right.
But it did have this jam on it. And maybe it's something that appeals to younger kids. I don't know if they know the video for that song or not, but famously, George Michael, who was one of the biggest stars of the MTV era, he was very handsome and had those classic videos. You remember he would
He did
not star
not.
in any videos for this album. And for
He had a
that
bunch of
song in
supermodels,
particular, right. But remember he burned his leather jacket from the Faith video, blew up the jukebox. He literally destroyed all the iconic imagery of the Faith era. It was
Right.
like, no more of that. I am not this manufactured pop star. And maybe something about that authenticity appeals to people now more than father figure and I Want Your Sex.
Yeah, I was wondering what the entryway is to learning about some of these artists, because clearly there's a big swath of the 80s that they just don't care about.
Right.
And that's fine.
The Cure made the list. That was cool.
Cure is on the list. Yep, that's
and again,
cool.
one of the things I like about these lists, especially this one where it's tied to Apple Music, you just click on it and it'll start playing. I think a lot of younger listeners will look at this list and go, what is this? I think older listeners will go, who's a Frank Ocean?
Right.
And you'll click on it and be like, well, that's pretty good.
Which is really the bottom line for Apple, right? Is, hey, people are going to stream more on our service. So that's why you put out a list like this and you make it easy for people. You hope that you're going to get people to sign up.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the bottom line. It's the other thing that, aside from the 80s, that I felt was obviously got the short shrift, but we had Jermaine Dupri on the day the list came out. We had Jermaine Dupri on TMZ Live, and he was so upset that he felt he applauded them for the inclusion and that hip hop was very well represented, but he felt like R&B, especially early 2000s R&B, they just didn't give it any props whatsoever.
Yeah. I feel like it's disrespectful. I'm not even gonna use the word slight. It's disrespectful to the genre of R&B because every artist from my era, I would say from 92 till now, the things that we listen to, for me, even as a producer, to get songwriter, to get to who I am, None of those people are represented on this list. Diana Ross is not on this list. TLC is not on this list. My great friend Mariah Carey, she's not on the list. I mean, I could go on and on. We're not even talking about me. I'm just saying the genre of R&B seems like it was very much left off this list.
The weird thing is that I always think of the 90s and early 2000s as like a golden era for R&B. Aside from Motown,
right?
That's the golden era for R&B.
And Mary J. Blige's "My Life" made the list.
Mary J's on. Usher's
Confessions made the list.
On.
And Lauryn Hill, it's hip hop and R&B.
Right.
Yeah, not a whole lot of other good R&B.
No, like we said, no Mariah, no Alicia Keys.
Nope.
Even Destiny's Child not on there, which I thought they would get in.
Although Solange made it. Beyonce's sister Solange got on
make
there.
It.
Yeah, no Boyz II Men, no
Boyz II
Jodeci,
Men, no Ashanti, Ja Rule. And you could argue maybe they just didn't put together a full collection that was worthy.
What album would you pick?
No Nelly. I'm just thinking about people who were like mainstays of radio at that time, and maybe that's it. Maybe they just viewed them as like singles artists.
Right. Justin Timberlake did not make the list. I thought Future Sex Love Sounds might have made it.
Yeah.
Because that was a very influential album, and I think people just don't like him now.
You think it's the Britney thing?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Although Britney's not on the list.
Thing. Yeah, and
maybe
Britney's
one more time.
Not on the list.
I mean, I could see that album making the list.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been shocked if they put. I mean, based on everything else.
I thought interesting some of the things people talked about the genre breakdown. So hip hop had the most with 21. Only one country album on the entire list. Casey Musgrave's Golden Hour. So no Johnny Cash. No Waylon Jennings. That's the only country album.
That's unfair to country. That's
very unfair.
Really unfair.
No blues albums. Only one reggae, one Bob Marley record.
Exodus, which they kind of, they didn't have to do anything, but.
Yeah. But it's interesting, I thought two 90s acts, Portishead and Massive Attack, both made the list. They are influential figures in trip hop. Trip hop was a niche genre in the 90s. I don't know why it needs two, and country gets one, and reggae gets one.
When I see people like that on the list, no offense to their fans, I just go like, in the top 100, you just knocked out some artists that had to have an album that, like, I don't know. This seems crazy. By the way, TLC's not on the list.
Oh, Crazy Sexy Cool should be on there.
How is TLC not on this list?
Keeps popping in my head the stuff that's been forgotten.
This is what Jermaine Dupri was talking about. So I went through.
Tony Braxton.
No Tony Braxton, no TLC. There's one Usher. Outkast got in with one, and I think you could debate.
You could argue which one. It could be Stankonia. Poppier fans might want Speaker Box Love Below.
They didn't go with either. It was
Aquemini.
Yeah. No T.I., no Future, who are guys that were extremely influential.
Absolutely.
And this was what Jermaine Dupri said. He goes, you can't have a lot of the artists that they did put on this list without these people. So how are you not acknowledging the very people that these artists you put on the list would tell you influence them? Like,
which is something Lauryn Hill herself said when she found out she had the #1 album. She's like, obviously I'm very honored by this, but I would be remiss not to acknowledge everybody who influenced me up to that point to make that record.
Yep.
Yeah, she's right. Some other people, I was like, right now.
No Arrested Development.
Oh, well, I would put them on there because I love Arrested Development.
And that album, by the way, should be on there.
3 years, 5 months, and 2 days in the life of. Yes, I will ride hard for that record. Lil Wayne, none of the Carter albums made it. He's not on the list. 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying is on there. No Lil Wayne. No Elvis record made it. No Sex Pistols. No Frank Sinatra. Even more of the modern indie rock stuff. Bon Iver's For Emma Forever Ago could have made it, didn't. MGMT's Oracular Spectacular, which introduced 80s synth pop back into indie rock and was a hugely influential record. Not on there. Liz Phair's Exile in Guyville. No Police. No REM. No Frank Zappa. There's so many artists that like, how not a single REM album is better.
There's definitely a Police album. There's definitely
even
a
if you go
Police
Synchronicity,
album.
the obvious one.
Right. It's, I don't know. And yet you have, and I don't care who I'm going to piss off by saying this.
Okay, go ahead.
And yet Lorde, what was she? I think it was like pretty high. It was like 90 or 80 something.
80 or 90. Yeah, she was not near the top.
So it wasn't near the top, but still, that's a slot that the Police Synchronicity, even if you put Police Synchronicity at 92 or whatever you want, fine. But that should be there over Lorde.
But
Lorde
see, this is the generational thing. No, Royals, when Royals hit in 2013, that song was like nothing else that came before it. And it's why we have like Billie Eilish and that kind of like sad teen girl thing now. She's sort of
Well, maybe I'm not happy that we have that.
Billie Eilish did make the list, by the way,
Yes, Billie Eilish made the.
which is fine. I like Billie Eilish.
I guess what this really comes down to is how much time needs to pass before your art is considered among the greatest, any greatest list. You could do top 200, you could do top 50, whatever it is. How much time has to pass before your album should be considered a great? And I think when you go to the things that people have issues with, that's all it is. It really just
Right.
comes down to time. Like, there hasn't been enough time to say that Lemonade is the top 10 album of all time.
Yeah.
You could do that maybe 10, 15 years from now. But you know what? 10, 15 years from now, there's going to be a different generation that's making this list.
Exactly.
And then suddenly, when Beyonce's not on it, then everyone's going to be going, "What?
Where's
the hell's going
Lemonade?"
on?"
Like you said, when you were when you were in our teens and 20s, when these lists were coming out and Rolling Stone made them, we're like, where's all the stuff we like from the 80s and 90s?
Exactly.
You know, it happens. That's why I don't begrudge this list. It's all lists. It's all just opinions. It's all just opinions.
And you know what
Led
to say
Zeppelin
about
2
opinions.
over Led Zeppelin 4. I mean, how do you do that?
Led Zeppelin 4 has never, ever been acknowledged by critics as anything. They just hate it, even
if you
though
take
Stairway to Heaven's on.
even if you don't count Stairway to Heaven, you got Black Dog and Rock and Roll and Misty Mountain Hop over Led Zeppelin 2. Easy. Even the old records they didn't even always get right. Did Queen have any albums on the list?
No Queen. Zero Queen.
Also, I think because they didn't, and I understand this, there's no greatest hits albums on this. And that
Yeah.
makes sense. That seems like
Yeah,
a cheat.
and I
But
totally
there
get
are
that.
certain artists like Bob Marley, Exodus is on there, but Legend, his compilation,
Sure.
should be on there.
Sure.
But
But
Billy Joel's greatest hits, maybe. ABBA's Gold greatest
Billy
hits.
Joel, you think they would ever Billy
No,
Joel?
I'm saying-
Billy Joel's not getting, he's not sniffing
I'm saying
this
people
thing.
who maybe a greatest hits thing would best sum up their work.
But I also think that there are Billy Joel albums that are worthy. You could have picked The Stranger. You could have picked 52nd Street. But
Glass Houses, I like
and
that.
Glass Houses. But anyway, you know, they're
But this is what old people say.
right. They're like, we're not giving you Billy Joel. We'll throw you a bone. We put Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run on. Leave us alone. All right.
Which is
Now let's
why
get back-
I get
Now
certain
give me the
people-
Frank Ocean album. Put that on.
Like the Clash's London Calling is on the list, as it should be. But that's sort of like their, well, this is punk. We don't need the Sex Pistols. We don't need the Ramones. We don't need
Right.
any of the
Here's
more
your
Black Flag. We don't need that on there. But then why 2 trip hop albums? Like, of all the genres to kind of overrepresent.
you know what? That might be the greatest crime on
It's
the entire
weird.
thing. It's just a weird
And I'm not even knocking Portishead or Massive Attack. They're great, but over,
on a top 100 of all time.
yeah, over any REM record.
And to have only no REM and to have just one country album. That is, and look, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm like the world's biggest country fan, and
No,
I'm not. But I acknowledge that there should be more than one, and the one album that's on there is one from the last 8 years.
Yeah, Golden Hour. I'm a little bit older than that, but yeah,
Come on,
get it together, Apple.
sheesh. Well, look, Apple won because they got yet another podcast to talk about their
Of
list.
course, and of course, when I'm looking at the list, I'm like clicking on it. Listen. Even the albums I already know, like
By the
now
way-
in the context I want to hear.
And now everyone, I can hear everyone groaning, going, "Yeah, of course these two listen to Apple Music." Ugh, God,
I have
so
I have
old.
subscriptions to Apple and Spotify, so
Oh.
I am that big of a nerd
Oh, all right.
because
well,
each one has their strengths.
I'm on Apple Music. Actually, you know what? Here's a weird thing. I got to figure this out. I pay for Spotify every month. I see it on my credit card, and I swear that someone years ago jacked my credit card somehow, and they signed up for Spotify, and I'm just paying for it because I don't know how to. If I have a Spotify account,
Now you sound like an old man.
I don't know how. I don't know what it is. Like I don't remember signing up for it.
Can one of you kids show me how to log into the Spotify?
But I'm paying $15 every month, and I don't know.
Oh, I think it's 17. Isn't it $16.99 now?
It's probably
think it
gone
went up a
up, and
bit,
I didn't
yeah.
even notice because I don't know how I got it. But-
Spotify has better playlists. Apple Music for
Really?
me is more convenient in the car with an iPhone just to pull up, and I have tons of music saved on my phone in case I don't have internet. Because what am I going to do? Not have Arrested Development's album if my internet
Right.
goes out? I ripped those CDs a long time ago. It's just more convenient to have Apple Music in the car, but Spotify I like for other things.
You know what would be fun? Maybe I'll do this. Maybe this will be a weekend project for me. I have, just to fully date myself one more time before we get out of here, I have two metal attaché cases, I guess you would call them, or we did back in the day, that are filled with all of my CDs. I got rid of the jewel cases,
Right.
destroyed the environment by throwing those out. But I have all of them in sleeves in 2 cases about this big.
Mm-hmm.
I go through and figure out how many of them are on this list. Very few.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
I probably have 20 of these albums.
Yeah.
That I personally own, and that's it.
I was kind of proud of myself. I went through just to see with vinyl, as I've been buying more vinyl. Of their top 10, Kendrick Lamar and Frank Ocean are the only 2 I don't have on vinyl.
Wow.
Yeah, I already had all the
Right.
others.
See, one of us is young here, at heart.
At heart. At heart.
At heart. And
All right, Grandpa.
I will say before we go, they put Marvin Gaye's What's Going On the list. So I'm going to keep my bitching about it to a minimum. I'm saying that now at the end of the podcast,
Right.
as I've been bitching about it. But I was very pleased because I felt like that was one that they could easily, in their minds, just slide it and be like, come on, we've heard enough about it.
When Rolling Stone
And it was
updated their
pretty
list,
high.
it was number 1 on Rolling Stone's list last year ago.
Right. And so
So-
they're like, all right, let's just give the old people one. But it was in the top 20, which I thought was
It's still a great album. I think even if you're younger, if you listen to that record, it still sounds just as good as it did in
sounds
1971.
tremendous as an entire piece of art. The entire
Absolutely.
album, start to front. Front to front?
Front to back.
Front to back, start to finish.
finish.
Well, that's
All
a
right,
good way to
Grandpa,
wrap
it's
this
time.
up.
It's time to go have your pudding.
Yeah, that's going to do it for us. We will see you next week on Get to the Hook.